we need to talk about a quiet, deeply disturbing shift that is currently happening in the anime industry. If you look closely at the modern landscape of seasonal anime, especially within the massive flood of isekai, harem, and fantasy shows, you will notice a specific type of main character taking over. He isn't the heroic, selfless protector of the 2000s, nor is he the hyper-determined, hard-working underdog of the classic shonen era. Instead, he is socially isolated, deeply resentful, physically unremarkable, and heavily fueled by a bitter sense of entitlement. He feels wronged by a society that ignored him, and specifically, he feels wronged by women who didn't choose him. This is the rise of the incel archetype in anime. It is a character design built entirely around the psychology of the involuntary celibate subculture, repackaged as entertainment. But why is this happening? Why has the medium swapped out characters who inspire us to be better for characters who validate our worst, most bitter impulses? Today we are stripping away the flashy fantasy layers and looking directly into the dark psychological mirror that modern anime is holding up to its audience. To understand how we got here, we have to look at the transition from the old-school loser protagonist to the modern bitter fairy. For decades, anime loved the underdog. Characters like Naruto clips, or even early protagonists started out at the bottom of the social ladder. They were goofy, clumsy, and rejected. But the core narrative of those older stories was always about growth. The narrative demanded that if the protagonist wanted respect, love, or power, he had to change. He had to train, fix his attitude, learn how to empathize with others, and step outside of his comfort zone. The burden of improvement was placed squarely on his shoulders. But look at how modern narratives handle this setup now. The protagonist is often introduced as an absolute outcast, frequently a shut-in, a NEET, or a victim of extreme social isolation. But instead of showing him looking inward and realizing he needs to grow as a human being, the modern story instantly validates his bitterness. The narrative structure shifts to tell the viewer, you aren't the problem. The world is the problem. Society is shallow, people are malicious, and you are a hidden genius who just needs a system or a cheat code to prove everyone wrong. This structural change removes the concept of self-reflection entirely, placing it with pure, unearned wish fulfillment. This brings us to the first major pillar of this archetype, the weaponization of betrayal and the creation of a massive victim complex. A classic template used in these shows is to immediately subject the main character to a horrific, unfair betrayal in the very first episode, frequently an only accusation by a female character that completely ruins his reputation. This narrative device is incredibly intentional. By making the protagonist a radical victim right out of the gate, it provides him with a permanent moral blank check. Because he was hurt first, the audience is conditioned to excuse any toxic behavior he exhibits later on. He can be cruel, manipulative, objectifying, and hostile to everyone around him. The story will constantly remind you, it's okay, remember what they did to him? This perfectly mirrors the core psychology of the online manosphere and incel subculture. The deeply held belief that because a man has experienced social rejection or romantic failure, he is entirely justified in harboring deep resentment and viewing the world through a lens of hostile. The character doesn't overcome his trauma. He weaponizes it to justify his toxic treatment of the world around him. But it gets deeper and more structural when we look at how these shows handle relationships and female agency. In a healthy story, romantic interest is built on mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and genuine connection. Characters have to talk, understand each other, and grow together. In the incel archetype narrative, that process is completely bypassed. Female characters are rarely written as complex human beings with their own independent goals, flaws, and desires. Instead, they are written as prizes, or worse, as items to be acquired. This is why the concept of the slave crest, the mind control device, or the absolute loyalty spell has become a terrifyingly common trope in modern fantasy anime. The protagonist doesn't have to put in the emotional work to earn a woman's respect or affection. Instead, the narrative provides him with a mechanism of absolute control. The female characters are forced by the literal rules of the world to adore him, validate him, and depend on him entirely. It is a dark, subtextual fantasy of complete dominance, designed to comfort an audience that is terrified of the vulnerability and potential rejection that comes with trying to form a real human relationship in the real world. we have to ask the commercial question. Why is the anime industry funding this so heavily? The answer is simple. It is incredibly profitable to monetize loneliness. We are currently living through a documented global epidemic of male isolation. Millions of young men feel completely disconnected from society, overwhelmed by modern dating standards, struggling with self-esteem, and retreating entirely into digital spaces. The anime industry, particularly the light novel and manga pipeline, recognized this demographic shift. It realized that instead of writing challenging, high-art masterpieces that force a viewer to confront their flaws, it is far easier and more lucrative to sell a digital painkiller. These shows act like a psychological drug. They take a young man who feels powerless in his real life, and for 20 minutes a week, they let him inject a reality where a guy just like him is secretly the most powerful, feared, and worshipped man in existence, without ever having to change a single thing about himself. It is a loop of pure validation that doesn't cure loneliness. It paralyzes the viewer inside of it. This is exactly why this trend is so incredibly dangerous for the medium of animation as a whole. When an industry leans entirely into pandering to an audience's bitterness, the quality of storytelling completely tanks. We lose the slow-burn narratives, the complex moral gray areas, and the challenging character development that made the classics legendary. We replace them with copy-paste templates designed to generate short-form aura edits on TikTok. We turn anime from a form of high art into a digital echo chamber that keeps the viewer trapped in a cycle of self-pity and resentment. But the most tragic part of this archetype is how much of a disservice it does to the very audience it claims to comfort. By telling a lonely viewer that they don't need to grow, that they are a flawless victim, and that the world owes them validation, these stories actively prevent them from ever improving their real-world situation. Art should be a ladder that helps you climb out of the dark hole you're in. It shouldn't be a blanket that makes the dark hole feel comfortable. We need to start demanding better from the media we consume. We need to stop settling for lazy, toxic wish fulfillment that validates our worst insecurities, and start seeking out stories that challenge us, break us down, and force us to grow. Because at the end of the day, real life doesn't give you a cheat code, a stat sheet, or an unearned harem. Real life demands growth, resilience, and the courage to face rejection. Stop watching stories that want you to stay bitter, and start watching art that inspires you to be human. Thank you for listening to my perspective. Let me know your honest thoughts down in the comments. Do you think the industry has gone too far with this trend? Or am I overanalyzing? Let's talk about it down below, and comment your thoughts on this archetype. I will be reading every comment of yours.